And now we get to my favorite lolcow, Dinesh D'Souza.
The first one is the idea that people who have religious beliefs are hypocritical. But notice that in making this accusation, what was being alleged is that religious believers have ideals higher than they can live up to. And this is advanced as hypocrisy. In other words, holding up to a standard and falling short of it. Now that is actually not hypocrisy. If you read the Bible, Jesus doesn't call people hypocrites because their ideals are too high. He calls people hypocrites who pretend to be one thing and are really another. The problem with the Pharisees wasn't that they had high principles, it's that they didn't have principles, but they pretended to be something they weren't. So we've seen a subtle shift in the meaning of hypocrisy, a shift that is advanced by the atheist side. Why? To basically pull down the moral ideals that we hold up that are higher than ourselves. That, I would suggest, is a very bad thing.
The reason we like to point out when religious folks don't live up to their own ideals is because a lot of these ideals are silly, first of all. We don't think a lot of them make much sense. Secondly, the frequency with which some folks fail to abide by the more pointless standards to which they seek to hold others is evidence that these folks don't really believe in them either. At the very least, what belief they do have in these standards is not strong enough to motivate them to adhere to them at all times.
Matthew made the argument that religion is a function of where you're born. If you're born in India, you're going to be a Hindu. Actually, I was born in India. I was raised Catholic. But never mind that your religious identity is formed as a result of where you're born. If you're born in Afghanistan, you're a Muslim, and so on. Well, I think this applies to all our beliefs.
No, it doesn't apply to all our beliefs. It applies most often to our beliefs that we don't examine very carefully. Apostasy, especially in places where it carries significant consequences, is often very carefully considered. Practicing the religion into which one is raised is often not very carefully considered.
Let's say, for example, that somebody born in Oxford, England, is more likely to subscribe to the theory of evolution than someone born in Oxford, Mississippi. Somebody who is born in New York City is more likely to affirm Einstein's theory of relativity than someone born in New Guinea. Now, what does that say about whether evolution and relativity are true? Nothing. The fact of your birth is irrelevant to the merit of the idea.
D'Souza's missing the point. The fact that people readily absorb the ideas common to their geography is not intended as a criticism of the merit of these ideas, but rather the care with which these ideas are considered. A population's acceptance of any particular idea is going to be at least somewhat geographically contingent, but this is exceptionally true of religious ideas and superstitions. You won't find as much diversity of opinion about even recent scientific ideas as you will about religious ideas. Many scientific ideas must be more carefully considered because they have so many practical applications. No matter what their religion is, engineers everywhere in the world largely apply the same principles.
So there's a kind of sleight of hand here. You have to judge the ideas by their own merits. Now, would the world be better without religion? You can't answer that question without looking to see what religion has done in the world, but you've got to compare it to what the world would be like without religion. There's been some allusion to the boring crimes of religion.
The boring crimes of religion?
But let me suggest that those crimes, even the worst of them, are infinitesimal compared to the crimes of atheist regimes that are far greater in magnitude, far longer in duration, and actually are still going on.
D'Souza seems to think that if the Russians or the Khmer Rouge believed in a god, they would not have done what they did. This seems far-fetched considering the fact that Ivan the Terrible fervently believed in a god and was still a mass murderer. Apologists sometimes retort that he didn't kill on the same scale as Stalin or Mao, but given the fact that Ivan claimed his brutality was biblically inspired, I don't think you can credibly argue that his theism is what prevented him from killing on an even larger scale.
You might have had some tyrants who killed who happened to be atheist, but they didn't kill in the name of atheism. The Christians killed in the name of Christianity. Now, Richard Dawkins is a respected biologist, and I think here you begin to see the problem when a biologist is allowed to leave the laboratory. Why? Because evidently the poor man knows no history. All you have to do is crack open the collected works of Karl Marx, and you will see that the atheism is not incidental. It's not some add-on, it's intrinsic to the whole ideological scheme.
Even if Marx thought that atheism is somehow conceptually inseparable from forced industrialization and the collectivization of farms, which is what caused most of the deaths attributed to communism, it isn't clear to me how that's the case. It certainly isn't the case that communism can't arise without atheism. Look at Acts chapter 4 verse 32, which says, "All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had." Acts chapter 4 verse 34 says, "For from time to time those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need." That's the essence of communism. This is the ideological scheme to which de Souza is referring. Rather than atheism being necessary to this idea, Acts implies that this was inspired by belief in Jesus. Peter and John, the apostles mentioned in this passage, were running a fucking commune.
Dostoevsky said a long time ago, if God is not, everything is permitted. And Dostoevsky's point is that when we get rid of transcendence, when we create a world without religion, we license terrible calamities.
The opposite is true. If nobody can credibly say that they have a God on their side, then they must justify any authority they claim to have by showing its own merits, rather than by simply asserting a divine right. If you'd like to help support my work, I do have a Patreon.